Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Mark Thomas, and I'll be your host for the next hour as we explore what digital trust is and how the digital trust practice model, also known as ISACA's digital trust ecosystem framework, provides a robust solution for any organization looking to enhance the digital trust they have with their consumers, customers, and their users. Now, you've no doubt heard about digital trust, but if not, we're going to give you some great information on what it is. We have a few things in store for you today. As you're about to see, APMG and ISACA have put together a group of industry experts to talk about this subject. The first half of this event is a pre-recorded session that sets the basics, and we'll go into a live panel right after that to dive a little bit deeper. We'll be keeping an eye out on the Q&A if you have any questions in the meantime. We look forward to seeing you. Let's get started.
Chris, you've flown 5,000 miles to be in the UK, so I'm not going to lose this opportunity to put you on the spot. We've enjoyed working with ISACA for about 10 years. We think we have a great partnership, we have a great relationship. Everybody in my team enjoys working with you and everybody in your team. But could you share with my listeners what made ISACA choose APMG as your accreditation partner?
Great. Well, the APMG relationship has been very fruitful for us, right? We absolutely appreciate the things that you do, and as our vendor, we can rest assured that when you are accrediting these organizations, that you're keeping them at the quality of standards that we demand, so that we can know that that digital trust concept of ISACA is being carried out throughout all of the different relationships that we have, whether it's the end person who's taking the class, whether it's the trainer who's delivering the class, the organization who's hired an ATO in order to deliver this, as well as the training organization, all the way through to ISACA. It's a symbiotic relationship that every part of the organization can trust the quality of delivery because of what APMG does for us. That's been proven over time, and it's deeply appreciated.
Hey folks, my name is Chris Damali. I'm Senior Director of Global Sales with ISACA. I'm coming at you today from Chicago, and I'm here to speak about the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework, or DTEF, I developed at ISACA in order to help individuals and the organizations that we work for and with address the problems of the future in IT. If you don't know ISACA, please let me give you a quick idea of who we are and what it is that we do. ISACA is one of the largest IT membership organizations with over 170,000 members across the globe. We've been around since 1969. And the reason why we have that longevity and that enthusiasm for what we do here at ISACA is that we work with communities to develop great new content and the topics of audit and assurance, security, risk, governance, and privacy. We then develop that into certifications, certificates, and other types of content that we then present back to the community that helps folks like yourselves and the organizations that we work with to address IT issues across the globe. Digital trust is a big concept. Digital trust is the benefit to businesses that is caused by realizing the positive potential of technology when all business participants, whether it's your vendors, your employees, and your clients, all working together using systems that are clearly understood and able to be integrated together in an ecosystem. We are getting new threat vectors on a regular basis, right? We're identifying new zero-day threats constantly. And you don't have to take my word for it. The ISACA State of Cybersecurity Report for 2023 revealed to us that 48% of organizations are reporting that they are seeing more cybersecurity threats than ever before. And ironically, what we're also seeing is that a major proportion, 62% of those respondents also feel that we are underreporting a lot of those cybersecurity statistics just because of the potential damage that it means for brand reputation and a variety of other elements that are quite specific to cybersecurity breaches. Right? So that has made digital trust really front and center for a lot of topics in the realm of IT. The reality is that distrust is increasing because the threat vectors are increasing. And we're seeing the emergence of new technologies that the old technologies have not been built to address. Right. One of the major emergences that we've seen over the course of the last 6 to 12 months is AI in a practical, real way. Whether it's Chat GPT, which certainly is a hot button among just about everybody. Right. You go around a water cooler, you go to a party, and somebody wants to talk about Chat GPT. So just about everybody has now recognized what Chat GPT and other AI systems could be capable of at some point in the future. And so as these new technologies emerge, so do the systems of evaluating these technologies need to evolve. And that is where, as professionals within this realm, we need to be prepared. We need to be ready to be able to address those. And a lot of that comes from the community connecting with each other, whether it's organizations like ISACA that bring together our 170,000 plus members from across the globe, or others that are enabling that conversation to be happening, and new methodologies of addressing these new technologies are developed. The core of the digital trust ecosystem framework, which we abbreviate as the DTEF, is enabling a framework that allows people to understand the systems that they use and the systems that their vendors, their employees, and their clients are using. It doesn't need to be the same system, right? If you think for a moment to ask the question to just about anyone at these organizations, well, how many vendors do you depend on, right? And then how many vendors do your vendors depend on, right? For most multinational organizations, the answer to that question is often going to be well into the thousands, if not the 10,000s, right? And so we've seen some fairly special threats emerge from not knowing who you rely on, from not knowing who you're depending on. And that's why the DTEF is an ecosystem. It's the ability to understand all the market participants and what set of systems it is that they're using, so that it's not blind trust. It's audited. It's supported by assurance. It's secure. It addresses the risks. It's within a stable governance system, and it respects the emergence of new regulations and laws around privacy that protects the individuals that are participating in this system. And so the ability to do that is dependent on the market participants being able to understand and to respect the systems that are being used by the organizations and enterprises that they come into contact with. That is what the DTEF seeks to accomplish. As we look at the possibilities for the DTEF and whether it would be more within a business, I think that there are ways that it is expressed within the business, right? Whether it's getting the right part of the organization, whether it's getting the right team, the right practices in place for that part of the organization. That certainly is touched on by the DTEF, and it can be utilized in order to construct the right capabilities for individual organizations. That being said, frameworks are specifically designed so that they can be linked into from multiple different organizations. And so as you look out at the supply chain, you're looking to use vendors that are embodying elements of the DTEF that are using the framework in order to communicate how they handle data, how they handle information in general, and how they make themselves secure. So the answer is both, right? This can apply at the organization level, and when groups of organizations use a framework together, that's where it starts to become very secure. And that is really where we are getting to the goal of digital trust, right? Those business benefits that come from multiple organizations working together that are able to trust each other, not blind trust, but audited, secure ways of trusting each other in ways that are well understood by each organization, each market participant. Well, that's all for me, folks. So thanks for taking a few minutes with me. And now I'm very excited to pass things along to Mark Thomas and Karen Heslop, two of my colleagues who will tell us more about the DTEF and what it means for all of our impact.
Hi, my name is Mark Thomas. I'm a training partner with ISACA and APMG. I'm also an APMG product knowledge assessor for the C-GUIDE, C-RISC, and CDIPSI certifications. I've worked with both APMG and ISACA for many years, and I was part of the group that created one of the initial looks at the digital trust ecosystem framework with ISACA.
Hi, I'm Karen Heslop. I'm the Vice President of Content Development at ISACA Global. My team is responsible for thought leadership that ISACA produces. That includes the journal, white papers, publications, as well as framework development. And I am happy to talk about the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework, or DTEF, as we like to call it. You might wonder, why did ISACA create this framework? As we were looking at the industries and the members that we serve and the professions, it really, became readily apparent that, as companies were going down their digital transformation journey, trust, and digital trust specifically, is imperative for them to remain an ongoing concern, to be successful in their various industries. And what we noticed at ISACA is that there wasn't a single framework that governed everything related to trust. There was, bits and pieces. There's governance frameworks, there's security frameworks, there's even privacy frameworks. But there wasn't a single holistic framework that brought all those pieces together. So ISACA did what it does best. We convened a group of global experts and brought them together to help us create this framework. And Mark was one of the experts that helped us create the framework. Any thoughts, Mark?
Sure, Karen. I remember some of the first conversations we had about digital trust. and one of the things that ISACA did very well was reached out to the industry and said, what are you hearing and what are you seeing? And some of the questions I remember us asking were, we were looking from two different perspectives. We said there's a consumer perspective who's consuming a service or consuming a product. And then there's an organization that's providing that. And I remember a very long discussion about, well, why would somebody choose to do business with one organization, say online, versus other companies? Or when somebody enters their personal information into a website, do they feel like their information is being protected? Or are they using that site because they want to or because they have to, right? And so we had those conversations. So what we wanted to do is really make sure that we looked at this framework that identified those pieces that said, okay, do your customers interact with you because they want to or have to? And what are you doing today to protect your users, protect that information? So a lot of people started to get concerned that, oh my gosh, this is replacing cybersecurity and privacy. It's not, right? And we talked about this, that we're really looking at an extension or an outcome to good privacy and good cybersecurity. We're seeing definitions from around the world, and a lot of them are different than what we defined with ISACA as a definition of digital trust. Walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember that, Mark? Like, we coming up with this definition, it literally felt like it took days. It really took a long time. We had a lot of input. A lot of the definitions out there, or if you look in the trade press, some people equate digital trust with security. And ISACA feels it's much bigger than that. In fact, the definition we came up with is digital trust is the confidence in the integrity of the relationships, interactions, and transactions among providers and consumers within an associated digital ecosystem. And, do you remember, Mark, we agonized over providers and consumers and what words we should use, because we wanted this definition and we want it to be read really broadly, right? A consumer is also a user. It could be a partner, right?
Right, because interesting is one of the things that when we talk providers and consumers, notice it doesn't say financial transactions, right? It's an interaction and a transaction, because it doesn't have to be a financially transacted relationship. Yeah, for that trust. And I thought this definition really fit almost any organization, right? With your profit, nonprofit, government, right? This definition actually fits quite well. Yeah. Or the top topics I'm having right now with the boards and the committees that I'm working with is, what are the knowledge, the skills, and abilities that we need to have in place for that? And I know ISACA has done a lot of research, and there's, every time I look at the ISACA website, there's updated information on the DTEF. So a little bit about kind of what is ISACA seeing from the marketplace right now when it comes to, say, knowledge, skills, and abilities, or digital trust in general?
Yeah. And I think, we've been focusing on the framework itself. And obviously, I work at ISACA. I'm very proud of this beta framework. But one of our goals at ISACA is really to get industry and individuals to think about digital trust as a concept, right? It's not just about good security. It's not just about, correct privacy practices. It's about protecting your brand. It's bigger. It's a business issue. And who are the stewards that really help to ensure an organization's trustworthiness? I would posit that a lot of the credentials that ISACA offers, so somebody with a CISA, right, Certified Information Systems Audit, or a CISM, or CRISC, CGUITE, CDIPSI, all of those credentials demonstrate that an individual has, in one facet of digital trust, has the skills to ensure a organization's trustworthiness. It's all about managing risk, right? So what impact, Mark, does digital trust have on corporate risk?
So risk, if you think about risk, thanks. This is a perfect question, because risk is informed decision making, right? You have positive and negative risk. But what's the risk here from a digital trust perspective? And again, I mentioned this earlier, that this is not a replacement of cybersecurity and privacy. Digital trust is an outcome of good cybersecurity and good privacy, and many other things that are part of this digital trust ecosystem framework. But what are the risks, right? If I don't focus on digital trust, I may not be able to meet my business goals, my objectives, and my strategy. That's the biggest one. If you tell me that I can't meet my business goals, you now have my attention as an executive in an organization. And this is what I'm hearing in the board meetings.
And I think the thing that's, really scary for organizations out there is you do have visibility into, second, third parties, but you are likely completely unaware of your supplier's supplier, right? And what this framework does is help you, it's sort of, if we're going to use corporate speak, pierce that veil, right? So that
right.
You can go back.
Right.
This is where IT audit is so crucial. This is where auditors come in and, they're auditing the supplier, but then part of that audit should be looking into every chain or every link in that chain.
Yeah. As you were saying that, Karen, it made me think about some of what we call the elements of digital trust. And like we said, we're not trying to replace security, we're trying to replace privacy. I always say it's an outcome. And so you might recall what we call the elements of digital trust. We already said we have confidence. That's in our definition. But the definition of digital trust also includes, and it may not say the words, but it really says we've got integrity, security, privacy, resilience, quality, and reliability. So we've got all those wrapped up all in that big definition. And I believe that definition we have for digital trust will be that definition for quite some time. From a very top level, what the DTEF, or the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework, does, it starts with these things called nodes. And so from a node perspective, there's no surprise here. It's your people, process, technology. We've heard of this for many, many years, but we also wanted to make sure we added the organization piece to that. Now, as a system, these nodes connect to each other, and a modification or a change to a node could have an effect on another node. So there's these connections between those. And those connections that we have between each of those nodes are what we call domains. And I think that the domain structure is probably one of the most powerful pieces of this framework. So when we take a look at these domains, we have things like culture, emergence, direct and monitor, architecture, enabling support. And we also have human factors in here because we talked about that a little bit earlier. And Karen, I know that as we were going through building this framework, one of the key things that we wanted to make sure we did, and this was a big concern for you, is that how do we make sure that a modification or change in one part of our system, how does that affect us somewhere else? Because a lot of times we don't do that. And that is when Karen had the brilliant idea of coming up with trust factors, right? And so you mentioned audit earlier. And, we have frameworks that have kind of that focus area. COVID has, we have our governance and management objectives and so on. But trust factors are the key areas. These are the actionable things that we want to do. So under each of those domains, we have multiple trust factors, and then they're supported by, of course, our practices and our activities. So what do you have to have with a trust factor? We have a designator. Of course, we love to have our alphanumeric designator, but we have an entity level control. We have activities to support that, associated practices, outcomes, key performance indicators, and so on. If you're an auditor, that trust factor would be a control objective for you, right? But as a digital trust professional, these are the activities and these are the things that I need to do to ensure that I have trust in that specific activity that I'm doing, because there's an outcome to that. There's KPIs, and those link back up to the nodes as well.
So you brought up human factors, Mark, right? What is human factors? Human factors is the intersection of people and technology. And so what does that mean? Well, things like ergonomics are going to fall in trust factors, in human factors. Things like usability are going to fall into human factors. But it's also about, are your employees using the technology as intended, right? All of those types of activities are going to fall within that domain of human factors. So each one of those 6 domains is the intersection of 2 nodes. So again, 4 nodes are people, process, technology, organization. The domains are culture, emergence, enabling and support, direct and monitor, architecture. What did I forget?
Human factors.
Human factors. I just talked about it.
Yep. Yeah, and that makes sense. And I really like this because the way that ISACA created the model was an organization does not have to copy and paste this model into their organization, because every organization is different. And we talked about human factors, we talked about culture and those types of things. So the idea is you take those pieces that are most applicable to your organization that will help you meet your organizational goals and apply those. It's not a copy paste kind of situation. It's very very dynamic, because digital trust could change tomorrow based on one event. So that's what the way this model was set up. And thank you for kind of connecting those notes to kind of help understand changes in this model could have an effect immediately.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Mark and Karen, for that enlightening session. It's great to hear from two of the world's global experts on DTEF. Next up, we're going to have a Q&A session with our panel. So for those of you that are listening, please type your questions into the chat window so that we can pass those along to the panelists and ensure that you get your voices heard. Let's get started.
Thanks, everyone. Great information on the state of our information and technology industry and all of these emerging factors that can affect us, especially the topic we're talking about today, digital trust, and why a digital trust ecosystem framework is key to helping any type of organization foster their digital trust throughout the entire digital supply chain between a supplier and a consumer, all of the vendors, third parties, and other types of organizations, and the external factors as well. But what I think really resonated with me during this discussion in this first part was why the DTEF, the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework, was created, and a peek into how it was designed, and most importantly, how it can really help us co-create value. Now, I'm keeping an eye out on some of the questions. I did see there were a few questions that came up earlier, and we'll try to really address those as we walk through in the next little bit. But let's move on and hear live from a few industry experts in this area that, by the way, these three experts are friends of mine. They're colleagues of mine. Been doing this for quite some time. Now, you get the chance to see their bios here, but a couple of key things I wanted to point out about each one of them. Dr. Blake Curtis, been a good friend and colleague of mine. Now, Dr. Curtis is a distinguished cybersecurity GRC advisor, no doubt about that. Really, where I got to know Blake was he was doing a lot of groundbreaking studies, and they were really exposing a lot of significant knowledge gaps and regulation challenges in our industry. He particularly was helpful with us on the Digital Trust Ecosystem Framework, and he was recently recognized as one of the most trusted cybersecurity leaders in 2023. Continues to shape the future of cyber auditing and skills assessments. And also, Blake, if I recall, not too long ago, is a newly minted father. So I'm surprised he's up this earlier because he probably had a late night last night. Welcome, Blake. Thank you very much. Rick Lemieux, another good friend and colleague of mine of many years, founder of DVMS and the DVMS Institute and ITSM Solutions, two organizations in this space, over 40 years. He's very passionate and very experienced in really creating and delivering solutions for organizations that are helping with really their digital outcomes that executive management is looking for, regulators looking for, and so on. Rick, also an award winner, identified as one of the top 5 IT entrepreneurs in the state of Rhode Island by the Tech 10 Awards for really putting together some innovative training and mentoring solutions. And I turn to Rick for a lot of training solutions for myself and for my clients as well. Finally, Greg Witt, another good friend and colleague of mine, author, instructor, speaker for many organizations. So one of the really cool things that Greg was going to bring in for us today is there's a little secret about him is he's been working for NIST. It's actually not a secret. He's been working as a NIST contractor for many years, has been part of the cybersecurity, privacy, workforce frameworks with NIST, also with ISACA, working with COBIT, digital trust, and also the Baldrige Cybersecurity Excellence Builder. So we have some spectacular people to talk to today. So I'm going to turn first to some of the questions real quick before we get to the panelists, because I want to get them some time to give some ideas and some thoughts in here. So it says, I got a question that says, will ISACA be formally aligning the current ISACA certifications to the DTE? That question I don't have an answer for. I know I can tell you that ISACA is looking at all the options right now when it comes to the alignment of the frameworks and the training models and those types of things. What I do is literally I keep track of the ISACA website, and they've been excellent about giving the most latest updates and information out there for you. So sorry, I don't have that answer directly for you, but hopefully that was helpful for you. Now, let's jump to my esteemed colleagues here. So I get a lot of feedback from a lot of organizations, a lot of people, and they say, look, this digital trust stuff, this is a fad, right? Yeah, this is still just cybersecurity and privacy. Why is there some new term out there? Now, I personally, I believe digital trust, and you heard a minute ago, I believe it's an outcome of cybersecurity and privacy. So how would you address this challenge? Greg, I'm going to start with you.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I'm going to draw from something that you said to Karen, is that security and privacy are outcomes. And kind of speaking to a question from David in the Q&A, information's part of it, but it's only a piece of what it is that we need to secure or have trust in. I think over the years we've kind of underestimated those domains, that connective tissue that connects those nodes. And I think we've kind of underestimated it. In fact, if you think about human factors, it's one of the things that's really kicking our tails right now. So I think, security and privacy, we heard a lot about that in the video, but really what we're trying to do is understand, what do we need to have to foster trust among all of our different constituents? And I think one of the opportunities is that we can think about the positive risk. You touched on that in your comments, but we've got security frameworks and I work with them every day, but where else can we turn that we can think about what are the triggers that might identify an emerging opportunity? What are the cultural changes we need to make to be able to ensure that we can trust the people that provide services to us, that they can trust us, that our customers can understand that we'll be there, not just that our stuff won't get stolen, but that we'll be there and that they can trust that we'll be there when they need us for what we've promised to provide. So for me, it's about much more than security and privacy, although those are in there, but it's about understanding what promises we've made, what promises we should make, and what promises we need to keep and how we're going to do so.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I always kind of think back to that whole comment is why do I trust one organization over another, right? Sometimes all it takes is one event. You could have done all the great events in the world, but that one event, I might leave you because I wasn't comfortable with the way you handled it, right? Those types of things. Hey, Blake, I'm going to go over to you. I know you've kind of been in this space for quite some time. You've done a lot of research in this area. What have been your observations around this link between digital trust, cybersecurity, and privacy?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I would say, just like you guys are saying, digital trust extends beyond those foundational elements like privacy and security, and even these emerging trends like generative AI, LLMs, and so forth. What we're really doing is just shifting our focus towards the user experience, focusing on transparency and accountability, which is often neglected from traditional control frameworks like ISO, NIST, MITRE, and so forth. And ISACA, just like in the early 1960s with EDP auditing, was the first to identify the significant gap, but actually do something about it. And so now we're focusing on the users, trying to make sure that not only do they feel safe, but have that confidence in the digital systems that they interact with. And so think of it this way, just like you said, Mark, imagine a company has excellent security and privacy measures in place to protect that consumer data. These are definitely two essential aspects of building digital trust. But if that same company lacks transparency in how it handles that data or provides a poor user experience, or God forbid, they actually have a breach, that trust quickly erodes. Then what does all that robust security and privacy actually do for you? So it's about creating that holistic environment, not just using it as a buzzword or a fad, but at the end, it's an essential outcome of not just security and privacy, but those DTF nodes and those DTF domains. So that's what my thought would be about it.
Yeah, what's interesting is I had a CEO. We were in an executive council meeting, and some of you may remember this story. He slapped his hand on the table. We were a managed service provider. We had just lost one of our largest clients. It was actually our flagship client, our largest client, and they left. They called the CEO and said, "We appreciate everything you've done. We're punching out. We're going to a competitor." And he was furious. He slapped his hand on the table. He says, "Why did we lose this company? We're one of the most secured and private organizations I've ever seen." Now, that's a big statement to make, right? But the answer we figured out was they no longer trusted us, right? There were activities, there were things that we had done that diminished that trust. Things all the way into relationship management, how we had handled a recent incident, and so on. So that was a great one. So you mentioned frameworks and things like that. I do know, Churhan and Patty, we have some questions from you, but I want to transition to the next question and jump Rick in here for a second, and then I'll jump on those questions here in a second. So we're speaking of cybersecurity, a lot of frameworks, a lot of standards, a lot of bodies of knowledge. It becomes overload. So Rick, I'm going to push this out to you because I know that you've had a lot of work in multiple different frameworks and standards and bodies of knowledge. So how can things like say NIST, for example, or other frameworks, how can they help us support our digital trust efforts?
That's a great question, Greg, and I'll give you my thoughts on it in terms of my experiences over the last few years. Managing organizational risk, resiliency, and privacy, is fundamental to facilitating digital trust across an ecosystem. The NIST CSF and its informative references, which are based on a bunch of well-known and trusted frameworks and standards and models, you provide organizations with that standardized approach to building, the business capabilities. And I use the term business capabilities. I didn't say cyber capabilities or technical capabilities. I said business capabilities, required to manage a digital ecosystem's risk, resiliency, and privacy. The capabilities, the business capabilities include the ability to govern, to be able to identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover from a cyber attack. So what you're doing is you're creating these new organizational capabilities from a business point of view that everyone in the organization participates in. Okay. So just like we have accounting practices and legal practices and manufacturing practices, we now have trust, a trust underpinning capability that needs to be part of the business, or at least the capability to support a trust model. The NIST publications include in there the NIST cybersecurity framework, which I'm a huge fan of, and also all of its underpinning informative references, things like NIST 853, the NIST privacy framework. They actually provide organizations really good guidance on what they need to be doing as an organization. Let me break that down into 3 pillars, right? The first thing organizations need to do in order to leverage what these frameworks enable in terms of outcomes is to change their views of how they communicate and collaborate within the digital ecosystem, okay? Digital ecosystems are complex systems involving people, practices, technology, and organizational structures, i.e. silos, that must be managed as a single system to deliver those secure, resilient, and trusted outcomes. So they need to do a paradigm shift in their thinking, and they need to look at this as a business problem, not a technology problem. And once they're able to do that, then they can move on to the second pillar, which is really understanding the dependencies in their digital ecosystem. Organizations can do this by asking the right questions to the right people and not assume anything. And I think if we look at, how systems have been assessed over the years, it's really been driven around a compliance model. Do you do this? Do you do that? Check, check, check. But no one really checks under the covers to see whether or not those capabilities exist. And that's one of the reasons we're having the problems we have today. So once again, this is fundamental to managing risk, resiliency, and privacy. The third pillar is once you understand your dependencies, then and only then do you have the knowledge you need to build an adaptive and an audible overlay model, that underpins that digital ecosystem, right? That overlay model is based on, these well-known frameworks and standards and models to deliver those secure, resilient, and trusted outcomes. So that's how the NIST framework and all of the NIST publications and standards from other organizations like ISO, COSO, and so on really provide organizations, kind of all of the guidance they need to go get things done, the things they need to protect their business and to deliver those outcomes. And just to your point, Greg, I trust, there are a couple of organizations I trust every single day. One is Amazon. They've treated me really well, and they take really good care of my personal data, and they make the transaction and the experience unbelievable. And the second is Disney. My kids tell me it's the only place when I go on vacation that I'm never complaining. I'm really happy all the time spending all that money. So anyways, back to you.
It was interesting. I was reading a research report on branding, especially when we were looking at digital trust. And this, I'm throwing this out there. Nobody knows this yet, but you know what the number one trusted brand in the world is? Band-Aid. Band-Aid. Band-Aid is. Right? Because Band-Aid could have a cybersecurity event, but I'm still going to buy Band-Aids. And some of the companies you just mentioned, by the way, Rick, they were also on that brand report. But I want to keep what you were saying, since we have a unique resource here that was part of the creation of a lot of the NIST documentation. Greg Witt, I'm going to jump to you. Anything that you want to follow up on what Rick was just talking about the frameworks? Because you were part of really helping understand what some of those fundamentals were from multiple other frameworks, particularly CSF, and how they could support the CSF. And again, back to the audience, I'm going to get to your questions here in just a second. So panelists, if you could read some of the questions so we could be prepared for them when Greg gets done.
Well, it also looks like Turhan was looking over your shoulder at your notes, because he's right on cue with the same question as well. And to be fair, NIST convened the conferences where we maintain that cybersecurity framework, but Rick helped build it too. So did many others that are here with us today. We were really fortunate that we brought in experts from around the world to say, what do we need? How are we going to do it? And I think one of the real differences about CSF, and really it echoes what the digital trust ecosystem framework does, is that it's not so much a controls framework like we're used to. We could point to many different control frameworks and models, but the Kevin Stein, my manager at NIST, called the CSF a docking station. It's there to drive conversation, as Rick was talking about. It's there to have a conversation about what do we need to do, what are we doing well, what are we not doing well. The brand names that you all were describing did not get where they are by accident. They got there by enumerating the things that would enhance trust, avoiding the things that would reduce trust, and by thinking about how could we improve trust. And I think that's really largely what the DTEF is trying to do, is not try to take over for the security or privacy or any other framework, but really to drive discussions around those trust factors. What is it we could do that would help us to get a jump start? Are we looking for the triggers that would help us know what next opportunities just over the next hill? If we don't know what we're looking for, we'll miss it. If we don't know what's affecting our culture and causing us to have those challenges, we won't know it. So I think it, like the CSF, it drives conversation around what are we doing, what could we do better, what do we need to watch out for and avoid doing. And I think in that sense, it's much different from what's out there, and yet it integrates closely with all of those things.
Yeah. To follow up on that, and Turhan had asked too, is what do other frameworks have to do with this? So just so everybody knows that it's not like there were a bunch of people who sat in a room and thought they were smarter than everybody else that created a brand new framework. This framework is a consolidation of the most pertinent parts and the most applicable parts from other frameworks out there, and in references saying, hey, here's where this came from. It's not a copy paste, but we're really kind of looking from that perspective too. So that's good. So I'm going to open this up to the panelists. Patty, good friend of mine, a colleague, Patty, says, hey, my clients frequently mention their difficulty in conveying to the senior level the criticality of viewing digital trust and governance as a business level concern, not just an IT concern. What advice would you give these folks? I'll start off with just 2 or 3 quick comments, and I want to open it up. Greg, since you're looking at us, I see you spotlighted. I'll hit you first, and then I know Blake is itching to say something about this. Here's how you get my attention as an executive. As a member of several boards and previous executive, there's a couple things you can do to get my attention. Number one, if you tell me that something will affect me meeting my goals, you have my attention. Why? As an executive, right? I am charged with helping meet organizational goals, and my cascading of goals help me do that. And number two, if you tell me that a risk will prevent me from meeting one of those goals, or will create some type of hardship like pain, harm, compliance. If you can associate that risk with one of my key business initiatives, you have my attention. Third piece is why is it that as executives we were so excited to digitally transform, right? We wanted to digitally transform so we could tell the world we're digitally transforming. But what we did when we digitally transformed is we created vulnerabilities that we may not have expected. So why aren't we also looking at this from a trust perspective to the outcomes of those? Greg, you're up.
Well, thank you. I think part of it comes back to, I'm just going to keep pushing it. And you mentioned it too, Mark, the positive risk, opportunity side of it. This, we can throw all the technology and the tools and the architecture stuff at it we want to, but we need to be having direct conversations about how can we do better? How could we be attracting more customers? How do we become, the next number one on that trusted brand list? We do that by intentionally having discussions about what will improve trust, what will retain trust, and how do we avoid what could help us to lose trust.
You got it. Blake, on to you.
Yeah, I would actually take a psychological view of this, is that you think about the way IT is adopted, it also impacts your family members, your kids, people, hospice, and everything else. And so when you start turning that transactional language into more empathetic and human-based language, these are individuals you're interacting with. And so that's one way that you can influence them. Just think about if you purchased a product in home and it wound up hurting a family member. You wouldn't buy that product anymore. And then flip the script. You're now in that role. You are that provider. What are you going to do to help build and sustain that digital trust with your consumers in your third and fourth party line? You're actually in your supply chain as well. So that's one approach I would take.
Makes sense. Hey, Rick, you may have an answer to this, but hold on, because the next subject I want you to follow on. Blake, stay with me for a second, because we're talking about human factors. We've talked a lot about skills deficits with regards to cybersecurity, privacy, and now maybe even digital trust. So Blake, how would you characterize our industry's preparedness? And this is kind of your research thing here, because I want Rick to follow up on education and training with this. But how would you say that we're prepared with regards to, say, digital trust?
Well, Mark, so I appreciate this question. It is a pressing
You have
concern.
volumes on this.
Yeah, so it is a pressing concern in our industry. I'm just going to address this candidly. Based on my research and our industry preparedness for knowledge, skills, and abilities, or what we call KSAs, particularly regarding digital trust, it is currently and unfortunately inadequate. When we think of the skills gap, there is a significant skills gap across the board. Many professionals lack the necessary expertise in areas critical to digital trust, including cybersecurity, privacy, and the broader concept of digital trust itself. Now, in the industry-based research, not academic or theoretical, we conducted a study that showed that we had significant skills gaps in IT auditors, in subject matters, in big tech, in big four, which make up the significant portion of the workforce. So what that research shows is that our professionals are exhibiting inadequate levels of theoretical knowledge, book knowledge, multiple choice questions, a lot of things that the average person can do. But when they get ready to apply this knowledge practically in areas related to digital trust or cybersecurity, it's just not there. And one of the things that, me and Rick have talked about is due to rapid technological changes. If you think about the pace of technology, it's outstripping our ability to keep up with it. So we have these emerging technologies that introduce new risks and new challenges faster than what we can even train our workforce to do. And today, a significant portion of GRC and IT audit workforce struggle to interpret technical evidence and actually find and address the same controls that lead to data breaches like 2017 Equifax breach or the 2019 Capital One data breach. So that lack of standardization, I'll kind of pivot here to Rick, is unlike some professions with these well-defined standards and license requirements, our industry lacks a standardized framework for assessing and ensuring competency. So that makes it very, very difficult to evaluate the readiness of professionals accurately. And so I want you to remember this more than anything else that I mentioned today. IT, cyber, and privacy are not regulated industries. We do not require state and federal boards oversight to practice. And this lack of regulation results in numerous IT certifications, certification fraud companies on LinkedIn, inconsistent hiring practices that result in hiring people with a great deal of years of exposure, commonly confused with years of experience versus demonstrable and measurable task-based experience. But that's my perspective of it. I could keep going for hours, but I'm gonna control myself. I'm gonna stay right there for now.
You're going to yield a couple minutes to Rick, because Rick, I'm coming to you. You've done a significant, we're talking knowledge, skills, and abilities. You've done a significant amount of education around the architecting courses, around service management, cybersecurity, you name it. So I want to throw this over to you. You've done a lot in this space. How would you consider these best practices, some of the things Blake is saying around future, say, digital trust training?
Well, that's once again another very interesting topic that Blake and I've had many discussions around, and something I'm also very passionate about. Let me go back to the previous question just to give you my 2 cents on that. In terms of boards and executives, you have to make this thing personal, okay, with them as you communicate with them. So some of the points that were brought up about, this is going to impact this business capability or this business outcome, which is something that is important to the senior leadership team, because that's what they're there for, and that's how they get compensated. But I think you also go to Blake's points. You need to make it personal to them, so that the decisions you're making can impact your organization, the people who work in your organization, the people who consume products from your organization. And I think if you can connect those dots and get the CEO and other folks to experience that paradigm shift in their thinking, I think you'll make progress in moving the ball forward. But in terms of education, I think the universities and other organizations have done a great job of teaching the theory. And the challenge has been, how do you convert that theory into action, okay, into real outcomes and so on. And I think that's a big gap that exists in the marketplace today. I think, to Blake's point, the industry is changing so fast. And, an organization has to be a learning organization or a continual learning organization to stay current with the latest and greatest. But at the base of anyone's, knowledge base, needs to be not only the theory, but the ability to know how to go apply that theory in the context of creating specific solutions. Okay. I think we're getting closer to that. We're not there yet. We're starting to see, a paradigm shift in that area with our higher ed institutions, with some of the K through 12 systems and so on, as well as some of the providers like ISACA and others. They're starting to realize that, these are new business capabilities that need to be enabled. And in order for that to happen, people need new skills on how to go about doing that. It's really about changing the way they think about things. If you think about, people only see the world through the lens that they have in front of them. So, if I'm a doctor and I'm an oncologist or a surgeon, the surgeon wants to remove things, the oncologist wants to save things through prescriptive treatments and so on. So that's their view of the world, all right? But in the view of the person, experiencing that, has to look at both sides of the equation and make a decision. So I think it really comes down to having people, extend their view of the world so they can look at things differently, ask the right questions, and be part of delivering, these solutions that will, establish this digital trust that we're here to talk about.
I agree, Rick. And, one of the things you mentioned, ISACA training, DVMS, right? So many training organizations out there. But I think I'd like that link with APMG, because I do not want a doctor working on me who's not a certified doctor or accredited doctor. And that's where I really like that APMG role, right? Nobody's going to come and be a plumber in my house unless they're a certified plumber, just like my health. So I don't want somebody teaching me that may not have the proper accreditation. So let's move on. We're getting close on time. Prince has a question. Greg, I'm going to run this off to you. How does this framework help me in communicating cyber risk to senior management? Hit on that just a little bit. For example, does it take into account the hard numbers reported from outside in attack surface monitoring tools? We need to understand and capture, how does our organization look to adversaries from outside? You want to hit on that one, and then we'll start closing up.
I'll hit it quickly. At least I'll do my best. At least from my perspective, I think it's kind of a trick question. I think if you're thinking about it as a heat map or specifically a GRC tool, it's probably not the best one for that. But at the same time, when I'm thinking about, what are the risk responses that are not implemented, and why aren't they implemented, and what direct and monitor changes are causing us not to do the right things the right way, what cultural needs or human factor issues do we have that are causing us to miss those outside adversarial attacks, I think this gives you more information than we've ever had about those things to report to the board. And yet we didn't necessarily it's not about just SIM responses. It's about thinking about the cultural and organizational factors that are causing those gaps.
You got it. Everyone, excellent information. Thank you very much. Let's do a roundup and let's do top tips within 1 minute. Blake, Dr. Curtis, your top tips.
All right. So tip number one, focusing on the big three. So this is aligning academic curriculum, vendor-specific certification, and industry job descriptions with a common and measurable skills framework like Sophia and NICE. Tip two, modernizing experience. Stop solely relying on time-based experience and start focusing on task-based experience with measurable digital trust outcomes to help promote and support digital trust. And third is customer-focused controls. So when you're devising your controls, whether that's security, privacy, architecture, or code, there needs to be a key focus on the customer-oriented outcomes that help determine whether to trust one's product or solution over the next. Those are my three.
Excellent job. Love those. Rick, your top tips. Let's hear them.
All right. They're pretty much tied back to what I stated earlier. Organizations need to change the way they view, communicate, and collaborate across their digital ecosystem. They absolutely need to understand the dependencies within that digital ecosystem so they can then in turn put in place the right controls and capabilities to protect that system. And then third, but not last but not least, is to build. They really need to focus on building an adaptive and audible overlay system that underpins that digital ecosystem so that, the folks can come in and assess whether those capabilities exist. And then they can have a mechanism to continually innovate their system to stay ahead of the threat landscape.
I like that. That links back to, I believe you called the pillars a little bit earlier, which I really like that. Yeah, I really like that a lot. Hey, Greg, on to you. We'll finish up.
All right, closing us out. Well, I think one of the things that was most exciting to me learning from building the workforce framework is thinking about all of us as learners, from the first grade all the way to post-retirement. So focusing on those KSAs, the skills that we need. We can learn a lot about those from all of those different trust factors within DTEF. So thinking about those KSAs, thinking about how we can, as we've even seen here in the questions, moving from just color charts and risk registers to thinking about where are we and where do we need to be. And then finally, staying in tune, not just focusing on compliance, as Rick mentioned earlier, but thinking about how can we, in a positive way, pursue opportunities that are going to help us propel and get to the top of that, try to get up above Band-Aid so that we can be doing the right things for our customers and so they'll have full trust in what we need to do for them.
You got it. Hey, everybody, looks like we're almost out of time. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you were able to gain some information that was valuable for you, something that you might be able to take to work today or tomorrow. So just a recap, the definition of digital trust, as we heard earlier, is the confidence in the integrity of the relationships, interactions, and transactions among providers and consumers in this digital ecosystem. Now, we opened up with Chris and Richard having a conversation about trust and symbiotic relationships. And Chris talked about the challenges ahead and the fact that 62% of people feel that organizations are underreporting cyber breaches, which ultimately undermines trust. And then Karen stepped us through the digital trust practice model, the domains, the nodes, those types of things that the digital trust framework consists of. Now, get ready. Our second session coming up soon. Keep an eye out. Will be why digital trust is a critical business model. I would like to personally thank APMG and ISACA for all of your work into not only this session, but for all the work that you do for our industry. I'd like to personally thank my good colleagues and friends that you've seen here today, Richard, Chris, Karen, Blake, Greg, and Rick, for your expertise, and so many others behind the scenes at ISACA and APMG that have put their time and effort into bringing this information to you today. Now, ISACA members will receive one free CPE. You will self-report this. Just upload your registration confirmation from APMG and Zoom and add it to your My ISACA portal. Thanks all for joining. Have a great week.